Hi, everybody. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Abortion Academy. My name is Amelia Bono. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of Shout Your Abortion. SYA is a nationwide organization working to normalize abortion and elevate paths to access regardless of legality. We make resources, campaigns, and media intended to arm existing activists, create new ones, and foster collective participation in abortion access all over the country and really all over the world. We need to adjust this intro because SYA is absolutely so proud to be a part of an international movement for abortion access. And today's Abortion Academy session is actually the second installation in our Study Abroad series. In general, Abortion Academy is a monthly webinar series where we talk to one of our amazing colleagues who takes a deeper dive into their area of expertise. We've had a lot of incredible guests over the last year and a half, and all of those sessions are available on our website if you click the Take Action tab in the menu. And we really hope that these sessions help you deepen your knowledge, connect some dots between issues you're navigating regionally and what's happening at the national or international level, and just to give you fresh ideas to take back into your community. Audience members are going to be off camera and muted for security reasons, but you'll be able to ask questions in the chat throughout the session. And also, we have live Spanish translation available. So if you've never used that before, you can just go down to the lower right-hand side of the Zoom menu where you see a little globe that says interpretation, and you can just click that and select if you'd prefer to listen in Spanish. So yes, we are here for a study abroad session. And these are going to be sessions where we are chatting with an international activist about their work and their activism abroad. In this session, we will be talking with Maltese playwright Davinia Hamilton, and we're going to be hearing about her award-winning play, Blanket Ban, which takes its name from the incredibly restrictive abortion policies in Malta. Davinia is a Maltese-born, London-based writer, performer, and activist. She's the co-writer of Blanket Ban. And drawing on her lived experience and artistic practice, she works at the intersection of storytelling and reproductive justice. Davinia sits on the executive committee of Abortion Rights UK, where she helps shape grassroots strategy, and her creative work centers marginalized voices and challenges colonial, capitalist, and patriarchal systems of control. Um, so we are also going to be joined by a co-facilitator, co-facilitator and longtime friend of slash, crew member of SYA, Anne Rumberger, from Lux Magazine and Chicago for Abortion Rights, formerly New York City for Abortion Rights. Her writing on reproductive politics has appeared in Jacobin, Salvage, Lux, In These Times, and Science for the People. And the study abroad session, this idea to be like speaking to international activists, bringing in international perspectives to part of Abortion Academy was very much Anne's idea in part. So we are grateful to her for her awesome brain. And also joining us is Jessica Posey, who is SYA's admin assistant, as well as a Chicago-based playwright. Jess's love of magical realism and mythology seeps into her stories that revolve around social justice and mental health, all centering Black women. Her plays, Boring Black Play and M is for Medusa, have been commissioned by Definition Theater and Fleetwood Jourdain Theater. So yeah, I think that that's it. You can ask questions in the chat throughout the conversation. This is going to be a fairly informal conversation between the folks that I just said, as well as Erin from Shout Your Abortion, who is not only our comms person, but our international connections person. And so I'm just gonna let these babes get into it and chat, and feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the conversation that they'll sort of like bring in as they can. And yeah, with that, take it away, everybody else.
Thanks, Amelia. I'm super excited about this conversation, and I feel like Davinia and I have been plotting this for many, many months. So I'm really thrilled that you're here and talking with us about your work, both playwriting work and abortion activism work, and how those two connect to each other. I would love to maybe just start off with asking you to tell us about your play Blanket Ban. What is the play about? How did you come up with this idea? What was your process like writing Blanket Ban? And then maybe you can tell us a bit about the latest production of Blanket Ban, which just happened this last month in Malta.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. It's really great to be here. It's great to be speaking to you guys. Um, so Blanket Ban. Blanket Ban was a project that my co-writer Marta Vella and I started thinking about at the end of 2019. And 2019 was the year where just sort of Maltese reproductive rights activism blossomed a little bit. There was the first pro-choice march that had ever taken place in Malta. Um, uh, Abortion Support Network made their services available in Malta for the first time. So we had sort of underground telemedicine, and there seemed to be lots of people who were suddenly talking about the issue. And by that point, I had been away from Malta for about 8 years. And when I lived there, I remember you didn't really say that you were pro-choice. It was so taboo. You wouldn't risk saying that you even, entertained the idea that reproductive rights might actually be human rights. Um, and so it was really wonderful to see um, this burgeoning of activism happening. And Marta and I was already involved with Abortion Rights UK by that point, because this was a topic that had always been close to my heart, because even though, nobody spoke about it, we came face to face with it all the time. I had numerous amount of friends who had to travel to get abortions, um, or who had to deliver pregnancies to term when they didn't want to. And so this was an issue that, you know, influenced us and affected us every day. Um, and so, yeah, Marta and I saw what was happening, and we thought, okay, we'd love to be involved in this conversation. And we're both theatre makers. So we thought maybe this is a new sort of a different aspect that we can bring to the conversation. And then COVID happened. So we were going to start working on everything, and then COVID. Um, and we had a decision, because she went back to Malta for lockdown. She wanted to be close to her family. She went there before the borders were shut, and she stayed there. And I was in London. And we thought, will we delay it? Will we wait until the world is kind of back to normal? And then we thought, well, we were just going to work on it anyway. And we ended up doing the first planning sessions via Zoom, and then doing lots of interviews via Zoom. And being in lockdown and being forced to use Zoom kind of was a blessing in disguise, because it gave us access to people who we would have had to travel to interview otherwise, and even to people who might not have spoken to us if they didn't have that sort of level of anonymity that Zoom gave us. So, in our recordings that we have of the initial interviews that we did, uh, it's interesting, because you can see Marta and me, but the person who's speaking to us is like a picture of a flower and a fake name, and that's how we always refer to them, by that fake name, and thinking of them as that flower, and that's what we knew. Um, so yeah, a lot of the work happened during lockdown. We collected lots of interviews, and at first it was difficult to find women and people to speak to us. And then it seemed that as the word got out that we were doing this project, more and more people wanted to speak to us. So we found that a lot of people had never spoken about their abortions to anybody. And it came up a lot that they felt sort of relieved that somebody was finally listening, that they didn't have to hold this and carried this all to themselves. So we wrote the play that way. We submitted it for this award, and we won the award in 2022. That was the Edinburgh Untapped Award, which meant that we could take it to the Edinburgh Fringe, and we had it published. And that was great. We ran there for a month at the Underbelly. And then off the back of that, we had a month-long run in London in 2023. And then, as you say, in March of this year, we took it to Malta, which was nerve-wracking, more than anywhere else we'd performed it, because I don't know, it feels like when you're performing in front of an audience of your peers, then the pressure's really on. Yeah.
Maybe could you give like a really brief like overview for those of us who don't know, like where is Malta? How many people live in Malta? What is the abortion policy in Malta, and has it changed in recent years? And what do you think it was about the year 2019 that like maybe changed so much or made people realize that they were, you know, kind of willing to resist? And does it feel different to you now, like compared to when, you know, you lived there in, you know, 10 years ago? Like, are people more open now when talking about their healthcare and abortion care? Are people regularly leaving the country to get abortion care? Are people ordering pills, abortion pills, and taking those pills? Is there like a network of, you know, kind of groups that are helping people either travel for abortion care or use telemedicine and pills for abortion care?
These are so many good questions, and I don't want to miss any of them. So if I do, just ask me again. But to give a very brief overview to begin with, so Malta is this really, really small island, sort of between Sicily and Libya, in the Mediterranean. And it was a colony until the mid-60s of Britain. Since then has been independent. It's now a member of the EU. There's about 500,000 people living there. There are more Maltese people in the diaspora than on the island itself. It is a very Catholic country. That's changing slowly. I mean, demographically, it's changing, but still, the majority of people living in Malta are very Catholic, both culturally and, you know, by faith. And so when I was growing up there, and I mean, it's changed a lot since I was growing up there, but even to this day, it remains quite conservative in practice. So if you look at the laws, it seems to be a really progressive place. If you leave abortion to one side, we consistently win the top place in Europe for gay rights, trans rights. We introduced gay marriage a very long time ago. We have free childcare, we have free healthcare, we have free education, we have free public transport. Like, it's a really progressive place in theory. In practice, that's a bit different. Gender roles are still really traditional. There's a lot that's expected of you when you're a woman there. I mean, anybody, but especially when you're a woman. And like I say, when I was living there, that was a lot more felt. And especially, you know, I went to a Catholic school, and it was really drummed into us that we were, you know, our purpose was to be good mothers and wives. And that was really the purpose of our education. Oh, hi, this is my cat. She will be joining us for the evening. So yeah, I wish I could tell you what happened in 2019 that changed things. It did fail for a while. And I think maybe this was a global thing. Sort of between 2016, 17 and 2020, there was a feeling like something was growing. And Northern Ireland, for example, decriminalized abortion in 2019, which was something I never thought I would see. Ireland in 2018 had repealed the eighth. And so there felt to be this momentum, which then was quashed. And obviously we know now that that's not the way things went. So I wonder if Malta was being swept up in that momentum, because we're on the internet. I think maybe in the 60s, we were a lot more isolated, being a small island and being cut off both linguistically and culturally. But now I think that the internet influences us for good and bad. So maybe that was the reason. The way that it is now, yes, absolutely, it's changed. People are more, people are still very afraid to say that they've had abortions, but people are not as afraid now to say that they are pro-choice, which is the first big difference. The law in Malta, up until 2023, yeah, was that abortion was completely banned under every circumstance, including incest, rape, including fatal fetal anomalies, including if the mother's life was at risk. In 2022, there was an American tourist who came to Malta. I think she was 16 weeks pregnant. Her water broke, she was bleeding, she was rushed to hospital. There was, basically the pregnancy wasn't viable anymore. But because she was still pregnant, there was nothing they could do to intervene. She was developing sepsis. They wouldn't do anything, and her travel insurance provider had to arrange to have her airlifted out and travel to Majorca to have life-saving abortion. And that sort of set the public discussion going in a really big way. And as a result of that, there has been a change in the legislation. I think that they've managed to make I think that we've managed to have something that's even worse than a blanket ban now, because the legislation is that abortion is banned under every circumstance unless the woman's life or the pregnant person's life is in immediate danger. And even then, it has to be agreed upon by 3 doctors. So before, it kind of, nobody said it, but if your life was at risk, the doctor would kind of go, well, I'm gonna, we're not gonna talk about this and I'm gonna save her life. Whereas now you have to scramble around trying to find 3 pro-choice doctors who will perform the procedure. So I think in practice it's worse. What activism looks like. So before 2019, most people who needed abortions traveled, right? They came to the UK, or they went to the Netherlands, or to Spain. And now we have misoprostol and mifepristone. You can order pills online. It's really accessible. It's really easy. And the latest stats, I think, were that last year there were 500 pill packs sent, which doesn't sound like a lot, but remember there's 500,000 of us, right? So that's 1 in 1,000. So yeah, so there's nothing really, there's no evidence that the rate of people having abortions in Malta is any different from the rest of the world. It's harder to access. There's also some really amazing sort of grassroots organizations and campaigns like abortion doulas, where you can call a helpline if you're having an abortion so that you're not alone. And they can kind of talk you through it. They're made up of doctors, obstetricians, nurses who volunteer. There's also family planning advisory services who will kind of guide you if you need to procure abortion pills. And it seems like, because, there have been a few women prosecuted in the last couple of years, but not imprisoned. And I think it's been 25 years since a woman was sent to prison over abortion charges in Malta. So the law is a scaremongering tactic more than anything. I think everybody knows that it's happening. Like, postal workers know when a pill pack comes through and they don't alert the authorities. Like, people know that it's happening. And it's a really weird discrepancy where when you speak to people in the street, even the ones, we're not going to talk about the extremists because you can't really reach them, but the ones who are sort of on the fence, who are sort of, no, but it's, I could never do it. There is always something that they're like, oh, but in that case, yes, right? So in the case of incest, or in the case of the mother's life at risk, and so then you can have a conversation. You can go, well, that's what this is, right? Yeah. Was that, I think I've covered all of them, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that they're like the chilling effect and the fear of criminalization or prosecution or kind of cultural stigma is enough, to really keep people from accessing care.
And that's the main thing, I think, and especially when you live in such a small place. I mean, it's true in Malta that we know each other. We all know each other. It just is. You're connected to everybody else by very few degrees of separation. Um, and so the fear of that stigma is real, because even if, there's no guarantee that, like, your friend isn't your boss's cousin, or and you could lose your job over this, or that, like, your hairdresser isn't somehow related to your mother's doctor or whatever. Yeah.
Is there a sense that like the word about abortion pills is spreading? Like, the work that SYA, the Shot Your Abortion, does is so important just because it's getting the message out that abortion pills are here, they're accessible, there are ways that you can get them for free if you need them for free. Like you can order them in advance if you want to order them in advance. Like there's just so much of the work is like messaging work and just information sharing, which for now is allowed, but like, in the US, like there's no, the right is coming after like even sharing information about how to access abortion pills. But do you feel that people in Malta like have access to that information? Like, is it aid access that is really like a real lifeline there? And like, how are people finding out about abortion pills?
Right. So I think that there was a lot of misinformation about the law, and there was a time where doctors and medical providers who were pro-choice were afraid to advise their patients about where they could seek abortion healthcare, because they thought that, giving that information could also be considered criminal. It's not. Everybody can give whatever information they like, and I think the pro-choice movement did a good job of making that known. So I think that there's quite a few pro-choice doctors, and people know who they are. And so again, because it's such a small community and word of mouth is really strong, if you find yourself in that situation, then somebody will suggest one of these doctors to you. That's one thing. And there's a lot of good publicity for services like Abortion Support Network, like Women on Web, like Women Help Women, which are the websites that will sell you the abortion pills if you need them. So yeah, there is that information. It's out there. I'm sure that not everybody knows about it, but people, the pro-choice movement is a lot more fearless now because they know what the law is. Um, yeah.
Have any doctors there been prosecuted or had any kind of legal consequences for sharing information about abortion access?
Not legal consequences. So there's this pro-choice doctor called Dr. Isabel Stabile. She's a complete legend. She's incredible. She's like the patron saint of the reproductive rights movement in Malta. She does such amazing work. And she, as well as being an obstetrician gynecologist, she also is a lecturer at the university. And she was sort of quietly fired from that job and replaced into the dentistry faculty because of her work. So it's not legal repercussions, but sort of social repercussions. No, I don't know of any doctors who have had legal repercussions, because you can't prosecute people for it. If you come to me and I say to you, listen, I can't help you, but if you go to this website, they can. What are you gonna do? Like, yeah.
Yeah, there's a really powerful interview that you did that makes it into the play where somebody's, trying to seek help and kind of gets information from a doctor who seems scared to share that information,
Yeah.
still does it, but is clearly, scared of any kind of consequences that could happen to them just for sharing information about how to access abortion care.
Yeah, exactly. And that was very much the case like 10 years ago. I think I know the story that you're talking about, and in this particular case, the doctor writes down Marie Stopes, which is one of the abortion providers in the UK, writes down the words Marie Stopes on a piece of paper and like glues it shut and gives it to her and goes, you can't open it here. That's the level of, you know, of fear. Whereas nothing, you know, nothing would have happened to him. And you can write Marie Stopes on a piece of paper, nobody's going to do anything to you. Yeah. So yeah, the pro-choice movement have done a good job of sort of debunking these scary myths that are there, that are designed to keep you quiet.
And such an important part, I think, of your play too, is just contributing to the open conversation about abortion as a completely normal and common healthcare procedure, and that's something that can be talked about openly in cultural spaces too. Like, have you, you know, do you want to talk a bit about, you know, either some of your previous playwriting work or other writing work, or like how you kind of think about bringing you know, activism around reproductive justice and abortion access into your work more generally, maybe beyond this play?
Yeah. I also want to, before I do that, I want to spotlight two organizations in Malta who are also doing this work, not in the theatre, but they're Break the Taboo and Dear Decision Makers, and they're sort of collecting stories and testimonies of women and people who have accessed abortion from Malta. And for them, and you know, trying to cobble together statistics, because that's one thing that you lose when you don't have, when there's a culture of silence around something, is that you can't collect information, you can't collect enough data to be able to visualize trends and see, you know, who's having abortions and why they're having abortions and so on, and they're doing that work, which is really vital. Other work, yes. So I work across, it's not just theatre, I write across like a bunch of different genres. And I'm working on a collection of short stories at the moment, which they are stories about like the fault lines of the body, and especially of women's bodies. Women's bodies are really apt to sort of transform and unravel in certain ways. They can feel quite uncanny. There are certain states of transition to womanhood, which are really interesting. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm working on at the moment, and obviously like reproductive justice plays a big part in that. I also, with abortion rights, I've organized cabaret nights, like abortion cabaret nights, where they're fundraisers where we get people to perform music or comedy or burlesque, and we just get together in a room and enjoy ourselves. And I love that aspect of activism, because I think that what we lack in activism a lot is a sense of joy. Things can feel so gloomy and dark and awful, and they are. But if we're in that space all the time, it's so easy to get demoralized, and that's what they want. They want us demoralized. So it's really important to me as well to create these spaces of joy and fun and, you know, humor. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We need more joy, and it's up to us, I think, to bring that into this very gloomy world right now. Yeah, Jessica, I was wondering if you wanted to talk a bit about, you know, playwriting as activism, since you and Davinia both, you know, are very social justice oriented playwrights, and like, how do you think about bringing, you know, politics and social justice into your plays in a way that's engaging, entertaining, educating, not didactic, but like challenging your audience? Like, how do you start off the thought process of like wanting to bring your kind of political ideas into an art form like theater?
I didn't know if this was a Davinia question or me. Um, yeah, but Davinia, something that really struck me was just how much humor was in Blanket Band. And I love theater that is humorous. You know what I mean? Because I feel like with really tough topics like abortion and any other social justice issue, it's really hard to make people pay attention or without them being like, oh, this is boring, this is dragging on. And I love how you said activism needs more joy. So I guess to piggyback off of everything we've been talking about, um, how was the process of devising the work and how important, like were the jokes, because I know with devising, it's all natural. You know what I mean? It's natural. You and your co-writer is just going back and forth and creating a piece of art together. But because of the topic and wanting to center joy as well, I was wondering just what was the process? I know it started with interviews, but I'd love to hear that in more detail.
For sure. So, yeah, I mean, we realized really early on that like if we were just gonna if we were just gonna make an hour-long show about how depressing the situation is, and it is, just people would switch off. Nobody like there's enough depressing stuff in our lives. Why would you want to go to the theater and watch more of it, right? So we knew that we had to do something different. Like we had to kind of hook the audience in a different way, and humor was like it just felt like the organic choice. The process of devising, so we had these interviews, right? We transcribed the first batch of interviews because I think I said before we started the webinar that Blanket Ban, the script changes every time we perform it, right? So every time we take it somewhere different, if time has passed, we change it to reflect both, you know, any legal updates as well as any new testimonies that we have. And so we had this first batch of interviews. We had an R&D, like a research and development period, where we went into the room in very comfortable clothes and rolled around the floor and wrote things on scraps of paper and moved them around, and sort of devised some of the core scenes. And then we had this brainwave, Marta and I. So we're like very close friends, Marta and I. So we have this sort of this vibe. Our day-to-day conversations are quite funny, even if just to ourselves, maybe not to other people. But that was quite natural for us. And we had this brainwave that we wanted to put ourselves in the play as characters, which was kind of terrifying, especially when we did it in Malta, because you're no longer playing like a character that you can hide behind. You're playing a version of yourself, right? But because the piece had sort of developed as a documentary piece, then okay, we wanted to be in this, which meant that we could bring in that dynamic of bickering and teasing and bantering and making jokes, which we do all the time anyway, onto the stage. And once that was unlocked, we were like, oh, we can play with this. Like we can have a lot of fun with this. So yeah, that sort of process, it didn't happen all at once, you know. It was as it always is, I think, for when I'm making work or in my process, it's always a process of problem solving. You go, okay, here's a problem. I need to solve the problem, and really importantly, these are the limits. And then you play, and then stuff comes up. Yeah. What does your process look like, Jessica? How do you make it work?
Yeah, I think it's the same as you. I'm in love with characters and I'm in love with how people react, how they live. So it always starts with like, I sound crazy right now, but it always starts with like some character like talking to me. Like I will be like, oh, it will be cool if there was some girl who, I don't know, was wanting to fight against this or this or this. It's the same as you. I think all theater is collaborative and it's kind of I don't know, the best theater happens organically. So it's a combination of pieces, like being interested in a character, wanting to talk about a problem. I am obsessed with mythology and folktales. So a lot of it comes from I've read a new folktale and my grandma's told me a new out-of-pocket story and I'm ready to write about it. And yeah, I think it's kind of the same things. Now I was wondering about that, like what I know abortion and a lot of political happenings kind of like inspire you. But I was wondering, I love how you said that it changes, like every performance changes based on laws and what's happening. And I think that's one of the amazing things about theater is that every play, every work is a living, breathing art. So I was wondering if there was a specific news or a law change that really impacted how you changed a certain performance.
Yeah, so to contextualize a little bit, when we first when we were finalizing the first draft to take to Edinburgh, it was when Roe v. Wade had just been reversed. So that was really in the background for us, really sort of a lot like a presence in the room. And then when we took it to London, that was after Andrea Prudente, who was this American tourist who had come to Malta, when that case was happening, and that it wasn't even spoken about that there would be a change in the law. There was still this public discussion, and so like obviously we changed, we updated the show to reflect that, and when we took it to Malta, we wanted to sort of reframe it because the previous two iterations, it had been very much a play addressed to a British audience or an international audience who didn't necessarily know about Malta or know the culture or you know what it is. And so when we took it to Malta, we wanted to twist that around a little bit and be sort of speaking with other Maltese people, and we had lots of inside jokes and lots of code switching, lots of like going back and forth between Maltese and English, which I think was appreciated because, you know, if we'd shown up in a Maltese theatre and gone, Malta is a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, they'd be like, what are you doing? What is this? Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that. It reminds me of like we have this in theater called Blackout Nights. So for plays featuring predominantly like Black people, plays about Black people, it'll just be all Black people in the audience. And it's so special just to see how they react to inside jokes, characters like reminding them of their aunties. I loved it. And I also really appreciated that you explained about Malta is here, da da da, but that you didn't over explain it. Like your presence was enough. Like you didn't feel the need to kind of world build for people, because the fun thing about theater is that if you're so interested in Malta, go
Sure.
research it. You know, you don't have to do all the work for the audience. And I think you did an amazing job at just painting the setting and just leave people wanting more. Yeah, we had a question from an audience member, and it says, could you explain what's going on with the EU-wide petition that is calling for the EU to fund Maltese women who are forced to seek abortions abroad?
Right, so I think they're referring to My Voice, My Choice, which is a petition that I think has ended. I certainly know that Malta has amazingly exceeded the number of signatories that it needed. And I think it's trying to make it a part of EU law that there is an abortion fund for people living in countries within the EU whose countries ban abortion. And yeah, I know that there was a threshold that we were trying to reach in Malta, and we've reached it and exceeded it. So that's really, really great. I don't know where it's gone since then, but I think it's a great initiative.
Yeah, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what the anti-abortion movement looks like in Malta, and maybe if you see similarities between the anti-abortion movement there and in the UK. Like there's such a like an internationalizing of like right-wing, usually American-based or American-funded anti-abortion groups that are like spreading their tentacles all over the world. But I'm curious, since Malta is such a Catholic country and so many of the anti-abortion groups, you know, at least that seem to be extremely well funded in the US are like more associated with evangelical anti-abortion groups. So, you know, I don't want to leave the Catholics out. There are plenty of anti-abortion Catholic groups in the US as well. But I'm curious, like, if you're seeing in the UK, in London, and in Malta, are you seeing like kind of the consequences of this like exportation of like American funded anti-abortion strategy?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We have evangelicals, anti-choice evangelicals in Malta as well. But you're right, the majority are Catholic, just because that's what the majority of the population is. It's interesting. I see more of a a comparison or a similarity with American anti-choice discourse than I do with British anti-choice discourse, which is really interesting to me because, you know, culturally, being an ex-colony and being geographically closer, you would think that it would be closer to the British, but no. It's also changed, right? So again, when I was growing up, it was very traditionalist. It was very like a woman's place is in the home with her children, and you know, if you don't have children, then you're not fulfilled, whatever. And that was kind of the line. Whereas now, if you look at and obviously a lot of like sex shaming, like that's a big thing. And that's not just in the anti-abortion movement, but like throughout. But now, if you look at online and in forums and things, you get lots of discourse that is like trademark American anti-choice stuff, or even American conspiracy theory stuff. So like recently, there's been these comments which are really weirdly anti-Semitic, and like Malta is just doesn't have that history. And you're like, what is this coming from? Oh yeah, you probably read it on some American forum. That's where it's coming from. I'm trying to think of but I think my favorite ever. I you have to laugh, right? Because some of them are just so ridiculous. But my favorite ever anti-choice comment that I've seen was some guy talking about how abortion is going to kill off the Maltese master race. And I was like, what are you talking? Like, what are you talking about? Malta, because of where it is, our ancestors are everyone. Everybody's been through there. There is no such thing. What are you talking about? And again, they've taken this phrase that they think sounds nice from the internet, and they've just sort of pasted it in a comment section somewhere. That's the Maltese. Yeah, and I mean, that's the funny stuff. You have the more insidious stuff where you have these sort of crisis pregnancy centers, which are funded by, if you follow the money, you're going to find American like evangelical anti-choice groups funding them. And I think there's one called Life Network, which I think, and I might be wrong, so we have to research this properly, but I remember reading that they get some of their funding from a faction in the EU, which are very right-wing, which are also funded by like American right-wing lobby. But again, I stand to be corrected on that. But this stuff sort of does filter through, and it is international, as you say. It is an orchestrated, like organized network. And we see it in the UK as well. So the UK is a really interesting landscape because most people in the UK consider themselves to be pro-choice. And I think because of that, there's a sort of complacency, which we see a lot with the work that I do with abortion rights, where people in the UK don't know what the law in the UK is. And the law in the UK is that abortion is criminal. Just last week, we had a woman going through the courts charged with having an abortion. And people here think, oh, it's legal, it's fine, it's safe, you know, it's never going to go anywhere. And so because of this sort of complacency, there's been a space or a pocket of space for an anti-movement to sort of grow slowly and quietly. And now we start to see them, and especially after Roe, after the overturning of Roe, they seem to have been bolstered. They're a little bit more confident in their endeavors. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
Oh no, I was saying it reminded me of the what were they? The sea creatures. I felt like that was a really smart way to utilize kind of like the Greek chorus being
Yeah.
like abortion is wrong, close your legs, da da da. I was like, oh my God. Um, but it also reminded me of this quote that like stuck out to me in your play, and I don't know, I'm gonna think about it forever. And it was, and if we don't talk about it, we don't understand it, and if we don't understand it, it's magic, it's mystical. And I was thinking about how a lot of what you were saying, all the anti-choicers, how you were saying, oh, they must have read that on an American forum. Um, I blinked on what it was. Yeah. And a lot of it is misinformation. You know, they're reading what they see. And so like piggybacking off of all that you were saying, I'm wondering, the opinion on abortions and choice in Malta, would you say that that's because of a lack of information? Because I know that in the show, sex education was kind of like weirdly presented, like how they was talking about it. And it was a very bad humorous moment. I felt bad for laughing. I was just like, why? But would you say that it's because of the lack of information from Malta, and because of they're trying to find this information, they're kind of going down the wrong path when it comes to the internet because, you know, anti-choicers would do anything to spread their propaganda and their messages. So I was wondering, where do you think the opinion comes from that abortion is wrong and it's taboo? Would it be an influence of America, or would it be like, as you've said before, where it's very traditional in Malta?
I think the American influence is relatively new. Um, I think historically it would have been more a traditional thing. So, for example, I had no sex education at school. The sex education we had was, you only do it if you're married. And then it's only for children. Like as in to have children, there's no other reason to do it. Um, and also, all of the people of my generation and older at least, and I don't know if they still do this, but we all watch the silent scream. Like we all watch this like anti-choice propaganda. And when we watched it in my school, there was a real theater to it as well. Like they knew what they were doing. We had, because it was a Catholic school, we had a prayer room, which was different from the chapel and the church. It was just a little room, which was quiet. You were supposed to be able to go in there and meditate. And there was like a life-size statue in all its gore of Christ crucified, right? In the corner. And then there was a little box television next to the crucifix. And so we watched the Silent Scream with crucified Christ literally watching us. So there was this real, and the gore on the screen and the gore on the cross, like there was this real theater, there was a staging, and that stuff affects you. Like we were 12, 13. Um, so yeah, I mean, you're indoctrinated in that way. And when everybody around you, all of the adults in your life are saying to you, this is a bad thing. This is something that, people out there do. We don't do that here. We're good. We're pure. Then, it takes a lot to question that. Having said that, what I love about Blanket Ban is that it gives me the opportunity to speak to people about abortion, right? Like people want a way in, they want to talk about it. And I love speaking to like older Maltese women who tell me things that are hidden, that are kind of lost to history and will be lost to history. Like, oh, there was this one woman from this village, this little tiny like rural village, um, who was a midwife, but not medical. She like carried around a little case of herbal remedies and things, and she was also like the town abortionist, and everybody knew who she was. uh, Everybody knew which pharmacy you could go to get your abortion, but nobody spoke about it. So this stuff has been happening for decades and decades and decades. This is not a new phenomenon. Like women have always needed abortions. So it's that weird discrepancy where everybody says, no, I'm against it, but actually they're not. Actually, they've either had one or they know somebody who has. That's what really fascinates me, because how do you hold both those things?
I think you bring up in Blanket Ban a lot about Malta's history as a colonized country and the like real deep need for a national identity, and that like national identity as being like, you know, separate, like you said, from like other parts of Europe and other countries that have been the colonizer of, you know, your homeland. So it's like a very interesting dynamic of, you know, the need to assert a national identity through these kind of conservative gender politics, and how almost like holding on to that, you know, kind of conservative gender politics is almost a way of holding on to a national identity. Like, how did you think about bringing that idea into the play?
And I think what's to add to that, one of my theories is that the anti-choice sentiment in Malta is quite obviously, to me anyway, like a racist thing, because I think that Malta clings so desperately to their identity as Catholic because they want to be perceived as European. We want to be perceived as European. I mean, there was a time in the 70s where or 60s, 70s, where the prime minister was saying we were an Arab country. Our language is Arab. You know, we speak an Arabic dialect. We don't look very different from our neighbors in Tunisia and Libya and so on. And so I think that especially after we gained independence, when we no longer had the crutch of Britain to sort of evidence our whiteness, then we had to cling to Christianity. And I think, and I don't know if people know about, like, I think this is an unconscious thing, but especially when I was growing up, before we became a part of the EU, when Malta was trying to make its bid to become a member state, it was really important to us that we were European. Yeah. So you talk about national identity, and I think that's definitely a part of it. You know, clinging to this conservatism and this conservative Christian identity. Yeah, I think that is about creating a national identity, and that's an interesting sort of conundrum to me in itself. When you're a country who has been colonized, like, how do you tread the line between creating a national identity that is for the good of the people without breaking off into nationalism? How do you not be fascist and still be able to create a national identity? I don't know the answer to that. I know that, you know, many of my peers in Malta are doing some amazing work in trying to sort of decolonize academia and literature, trying to translate texts. I'm involved in a project. Basically, what happens is that when you're trying to think about theory or criticism or any sort of academic endeavor, a lot of the words don't exist in Maltese. They're only there in English, or you can read them in French or Italian, whatever, but they don't exist in Maltese because we've just been colonized for such a long time. So what we're trying to do is we have an open source document where whenever we encounter a concept, a theoretical concept that there is no word for, we have an open conversation and create that word in Maltese, just so that we can think about that in our own language. But again, like, how do you walk the line between decolonization and creating that post-colonial, like, decolonized identity, and steering off into something dark and awful and fascist?
Yeah, is nationalism the answer? Sometimes that, yeah, feels like a dangerous road to go down, but yeah, like you said, it's always a balance. We have a really good question from the audience, kind of about the tensions between reproductive rights and abortion and queer and trans rights. So you mentioned that Malta has very progressive policies around queer and trans rights. And curious if you can talk a little bit more about how abortion rights feel kind of more separated from queer and trans rights in Malta, especially like given the context in the US where the, kind of attacks around abortion access feel very intertwined with attacks on queer and trans rights.
That's a really good question. And I mean, to me, it's sort of central to my own politics, that these things are a part of the same thing. Trans rights, trans issues are feminist issues, are reproductive issues. Like, there is no separation, and separating them is a political strategy. I think in the UK that is also separate. We've seen the horrible ruling a month ago or so about what is a woman in the UK, and yet the UK still wants to perceive itself as a pro-choice country, even though there have been more prosecutions in the last 3 years than there were in the preceding 150. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think I've often wondered this myself about the situation in Malta, and ostensibly the argument is with regard to trans issues, what you do with your body is your decision, but when it comes to abortion, then there is another person involved, right? There is another body that you're affecting. And that seems to be the thing that it all hinges on, because unfortunately, I think that the fetus, like the pregnancy, is a really it's really easy to want to defend that above everything else, because you can project anything onto it. Right? It's not even new. It's not even there yet. It's spotless. It can be anything. Whereas the woman or the pregnant person, they've been around. They're stained. They're a person, a human being. And so I think this ideal that they have of what the pregnancy is more of a person in their minds than what the woman or the pregnant person is, which is why they can make that separation, I think, that B is talking about, between abortion, because we're discussing euthanasia now. Like, how can you be having a conversation about euthanasia before you even had a conversation about abortion? How do you not realize that this is the same thing? It's bodily autonomy, but yeah, they've created a separation.
Are there like attacks on queer and trans rights from more religious conservatives within Malta who are like against the kind of progressive laws?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. Like I say, in theory, Malta is very progressive. In practice, not so much. I certainly think it's easier now to be queer in Malta than it was 15, 20 years ago. But that doesn't mean that it's utopian. There's still a lot of conservative hatred and prejudice and bigotry. And yeah, I mean, the Catholic Church is very clear on its position. It goes against the will of God or whatever. And like I say, we also have evangelical movements who try to perform conversion therapy in Malta, even though it's not legal there. Yeah, so in practice, they're everywhere.
I'm just gonna jump. We're getting close to an hour, so we should probably wrap it up pretty soon. But I actually have a question myself about the abortion stories that you collected for the play, because that's a big thing that we do at SYA is people send their abortion stories to us and we put them on the website. So I'm wondering, how did you find them? I mean, did you put an ad on like Craigslist or something, like want you to feature your abortion story in a play? And then two, I mean, was there a sense of like relief that people could finally tell their story to someone? Did people like continue to tell their stories, or they just wanted to, you know, like tell their story in this one specific instance? But yeah, just curious about that.
Yeah, so like I said, at the beginning it was quite hard. So people did not want to talk to begin with. So we sort of had to rely on our own networks and like friends of ours who'd had abortions and try to sort of convince them that they would be safe, that it was anonymous, and you know, for us that was the most important thing, was that we had a duty to care for these people who shared their stories with us above everything else. And I think we did there's a Facebook group in Malta called Women for Women, which has thousands of women, and it's turned into a sort of a consciousness raising group. So it was a good space to talk about this, to ask if anybody was interested. And I think we had a couple of responses from there. But then what happened was that, you know, people who had spoken to us would say, listen, I've got a friend who'd like to talk to you. Is that okay? Or, you know, I was mentioning to my cousin or whatever that I had spoken about my abortion for this play, and she wants to talk about hers. And so that it sort of grew from there. And what we found was that after every single performance, every single one, in every single place we've performed, there has been at least one woman who has come up to us and said, I had an abortion and never told anyone. Always, without fail. And sometimes they were older women, you know, in their 60s, 70s. Sometimes they were young. They were like young adults. Yeah.
Do you want to end, Davinia, by maybe just telling us a bit about what you're working on now? Like, what's your next creative project and or activism project?
Yeah, there's a few things on the go. Obviously, I remain on the executive committee for abortion rights. That's really important to me. I'm also working on this collection of short stories that I mentioned, which there's been a couple of them published in magazines, but I'm hoping to publish as a collection at some point. So if anybody's interested, hit me up. And I'm also working on a play with another co-writer, Jessica Muna, who's an American playwright, called Malcontent, and it's about the spectacle and the alt-right, and how the alt-right utilizes the spectacle in order to recruit people to its cause. So that's kind of what's going on at the moment.
I also wanted to pop in and ask one more question to close it out. Since there may be future writers or artists who want to approach the topic of abortion, or I don't know, want to talk about social justice and are scared to. And I was wondering if you had any advice for those theater makers, including me.
Yeah. I would say start where you are. Don't wait until, I think as artists, we often fall into the trap of like, oh, when I have this training, I'll do this, or when I move to this place, I'm going to do it, or when I have some money, I'll do it. No, start where you are, where there's plenty where you are. And you don't have to be an expert, you just have to care about it. You learn as you go. And if you are wanting to get involved in activism, act locally. There'll be stuff in your area. Join your local group. Show up to rallies. Volunteer your skills. There's the beautiful thing about the reproductive rights movement is that all of the skills are relevant. You know, if you're good at making websites, if you're good at writing stories, if you're good at organizing meetings, if you're good at setting up sound systems, whatever it is, there's a place for you, and you are welcome, and you are valid, and you are needed. And if you're an artist, if you're a playwright, speak to people. That's the main thing. To talk to people and listen more than you speak, I think is my biggest advice. Let them teach you.
That was like so wonderful, Davinia. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and thank you, Anne and Jess and Erin, for being such excellent facilitators. Yeah, I'm so glad that you joined us, and it's really it's amazing always for us to think about like, how different all of these contexts are, but like fundamentally there is so much that is the same. And I just was like, so it really got me, you saying that every single time you do this play, somebody comes up to you, or every time you do a reading, or like whatever it was that you said, that like someone always comes up and shares this. And as Erin said, it's like, that's been the foundation, that was the foundation of SYA's origin. And um, I think it's a good reminder that it's still so important, like to give, and that like just this work gives people permission to tell the truth about their own lives for the first time, maybe ever. And like work like yours makes people um like understand that, like I think a lot of people just think no one would ever care. Why would I say that? Even if they don't feel deeply, fucked up about it or whatever, they're like, yeah, why would no one would ever care to hear me say that? And that's just it's one of so many ways that I think, women are denied the sort of ability to just define our own experiences in a way that's meaningful to us, because it's like people don't care about that stuff. That's just a thing that happened. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you for like the consciousness raising work that you've been holding, and making so many connections to. I love everything that you just said about like local activism starting locally, and there being a place for everyone to plug in. I want to shout out that SYA has recently released some really awesome toolkits on our website that are everything from like how to do a landscape assessment in your area and look around and see what's already happening and where the gaps are, and sort of like cross-reference that with your own like skills and aptitudes, and start developing a project or finding another project to plug in and support. And we're so excited about these like getting into people's hands and inspiring people to like take that step and know that like you can be an activist. Like we're all just people that started doing stuff and then kept at it. And there's a place for everybody in the work. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. It really was like such a pleasure to listen to you talk today about blanket ban.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a great conversation. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for hanging out with us at yet another lovely um, installment of Abortion Academy, our our second study abroad session. Erin, will you remind me the person's name that is joining us next week, or I mean next month for Abortion Academy?
Her name's Bonnie McIntosh, and she'll be talking about holistic abortions, herbs and abortions, doing misoprostol only abortions supported by herbs, stuff like that. And then the following month, we'll have our third study abroad session with someone from Dairy for Choice in Ireland.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And our incredible friends from Dairy for Choice sent us a pretty incredible dispatch yesterday they were invited to Westminster for a briefing and on like decriminalization. And we recently made some shirts that say fund abortion, not war, and have a kafia on them. And we've been selling the shirts to benefit abortion funds that have lost major support following making statements about Palestine. And as everybody here probably knows, the Irish are not fucking around on the Gaza issue, and have not been for a very long time. And our friends from Dairy for Choice wore those shirts to Parliament, and were not let inside. And their entire description of the experience, like and the speech they wrote, it was just like it was all about tying together, these global issues of reproductive justice and making the connections between like imperialism and war. And it was such a beautiful speech. And we're just so proud to be like fighting this fight alongside brilliant folks all over the world. And we have each other's backs. And we're gonna win. We're never going to stop helping each other have abortions. They'll never stop us. So how about that? Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next month. You'll get an email saying the date. I don't know it off the top of my head. Excited to talk about herbal abortions. It's not something we've talked about a ton because it's, something that requires a ton of knowledge in order to like share with the public in a way that we feel good about. But our very own Tanya Kupchak, who runs our SYA shop, is like a witchy herbalist and took a class from the person on herbal abortions that will be joining us, Bonnie. And we think that it's a really interesting thing to think about, especially in light of like MIFI possibly being less accessible than it is now, and thinking about herbs as a possible accompaniment to a pill abortion. So yeah, please join us. And we love and appreciate all of you. And thanks for spending your day with us. And we'll see you the next time.